Trinity Douglas had one rule about her mother's dinner plans. Say no immediately. Do not hesitate. Do not let Phyllis Douglas finish the sentence, because the moment she finished the sentence, it was already too late. Trinity had broken that rule on a Tuesday night when she was tired and eating cereal and not paying close enough attention to the FaceTime call. And now it was Friday and she was standing in Jaewon's studio doorway, watching him pretend he hadn't heard what she just said. "I heard you," Jaewon said. He did not look up from the print he was hanging. "Then say something. I'm thinking about how to say no without hurting your feelings." Trinity stepped over a cable on the floor and sat on the edge of his work table. "Jaewon, it's one dinner, 2 hours maximum. You come in, you smile, you let my mother ask you 12 personal questions, you eat her food, which is genuinely incredible, by the way, and then we leave and I never have to sit across from some stranger, my mother, handpicked, while she watches my face for signs of love." Jaewon finally turned around. "She already rescheduled your shoot?" "Without asking me, yes." "And she's been planning this for how long?" 3 weeks, apparently, and the guy she's setting you up with. Son of some wealthy Korean family. Old money, I don't know. His grandmother and some family friend of ours apparently go back decades, and somebody called in a favor, and now I have a blind date on Saturday, and I need you to be there so I can end it before it starts. Jaewon looked at her for a long moment. He had a good face for looking, not dramatic, just steady. He'd been her friend for 2 years, since a photography workshop where he told her very politely that one of her compositions was slightly off-center, and she'd told him, less politely, that it was intentional. They'd been friends since. "You remember your exhibition last spring?" Trinity said. "Don't. 4 hours, Jaewon. I sat through 4 hours of photographs of a parking garage. It was a study in urban, concrete. It was concrete. And I stayed the whole time, and I told everyone who asked that it was brilliant." She looked at him. "One dinner." He hung the print, stepped back and looked at it. Sighed in the specific way of a man who already knew what he was going to do. What time? The Douglas family home in Dublin, Ohio was not a big house. But Phyllis Douglas had never let the size of a space limit the scale of her intentions. By 6:30 on Saturday evening, she had cooked enough food for 8 people, set the table like it was a special occasion, put on the kind of playlist that said, "We are a warm and cultured family," and was now standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Trinity come downstairs with the look of a woman who has already decided she will not enjoy tonight. "You look beautiful," Phyllis said. "I look like myself." That's what I said. Trinity's father, Leonard, was in the living room watching the game with the calm energy of a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that his house regularly became a stage for things he had not agreed to. He waved at Trinity without looking away from the screen. Trinity pointed at him. "I want to be him when I grow up. You want to sit in a chair and do nothing?" "I want to sit in a chair and do nothing while everyone around me handles whatever's happening. That's a skill, Mom. That's a refined skill." Her brother Caleb came in from the kitchen, eating something directly from a serving dish. Phyllis did not look at him because looking at him would require addressing it. Caleb was 24 and had the specific superpower of being charming enough that most things slid off him. He grinned at Trinity. "So where's the fake boyfriend?" Trinity turned on him. "What did you just say?" "Mom told me about the blind date. I figured out the rest." He shrugged. "Who is he?" "Nobody." "A friend. Does the friend know what he's walking into?" "He knows enough." Caleb ate whatever was in his hand and looked at her with genuine appreciation. "This is the most entertaining thing that's happened in this house since Dad tried to learn how to use the air fryer." "Nothing is happening. I'm bringing a friend to dinner. That's all this is." The doorbell rang. Jaewon was early, which was one of the things Trinity both appreciated and slightly resented about him. He had dressed well, not overdressed but well. He had brought flowers for Phyllis, which was not something Trinity had told him to do, which meant he had thought about this, which meant he was taking it more seriously than she expected. which briefly made her feel something that she immediately filed away for a later time. Phyllis lit up, genuinely. She took the flowers and told him he was welcome in her house, and asked where he was from, and within 4 minutes had extracted enough biographical information to form a solid opinion. Leonard came in from the living room, shook his hand, and told him the food was good tonight because he'd been smelling it all day. Jae-won laughed easily. He made it look natural. Trinity watched him work the room and thought, "We might actually get through this." Then she thought, "I should not have thought that," because the doorbell rang again. Phyllis moved to answer it with the bright energy of someone arriving at the best part of the evening. Trinity stayed where she was. Caleb from across the room met her eyes and raised his eyebrows. She heard her mother's voice at the door, warm, welcoming. She heard a man's voice respond low, polite, the kind of voice that didn't need to be louder because the room adjusted to it rather than the other way around. And then Young-chul Kwon walked in. He was not what she expected. She didn't know exactly what she expected. Someone stiff, maybe. Someone who looked like he'd been sent by committee. But it wasn't this. He was composed in a way that had nothing to do with trying. He handed Phyllis a small wrapped gift, thanked her for the invitation, and then his eyes moved across the room in the natural way that a person's eyes move when they're taking in a new space. They landed on Jae-won and stopped. The conversation didn't stop. Phyllis was still talking. Leonard was asking something. The room kept going, but Jae-won had gone completely still. Not tense, not angry, still. The way a person goes still when they see something that should not exist in the place where they're standing. Young-chul's expression didn't change at all. That was the thing that Trinity noticed first. Not the recognition. She could deal with recognition. It was the fact that he had decided in less than 1 second not to show it. These two men knew each other, and neither of them wanted anyone in this room to know that. Trinity looked at Jae-won, looked at Young-chul, looked at Jae-won again. She said, "Do you two know each other?" Neither man answered her. Caleb very slowly put his phone face down on the couch cushion. Phyllis had arranged the table so that Trinity and Young-chul were seated across from each other, which was the point. Jae-won was beside Trinity, which was also the point, though now the geometry of it had become strange in a way nobody at the table could explain, and nobody was going to try to explain. Young-chul was, objectively, the most composed person Trinity had ever shared a meal with. He answered her mother's questions fully. He asked Leonard about the game with the kind of genuine curiosity that made Leonard talk for 6 straight minutes, which was a record. He ate the food and meant it when he said it was good. But twice, just twice, his eyes moved to Jae-won across the table, not long looks. Quick ones. The kind a person makes when they're confirming that something they already knew is still true. Jae-won was performing. Trinity knew what Jae-won performing looked like now because she had seen him natural for 2 years, and this was different. He laughed a half-beat late. He reached for her hand once and held it, and the pressure in his grip was not romantic. It was the pressure of a man holding on to something, because the alternative was worse. Under the table, Trinity's phone was in her lap. She typed, "Explain." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it without moving his head, typed back, "Later now. Please, Trin." She looked up from her phone. Young-chul was listening to her mother talk about a trip to Atlanta. But the angle of his attention was wrong. He was not fully in the conversation. He was listening to something else, tracking something she couldn't see yet. She excused herself, counted to 90 in the hallway, heard Jae-won excuse himself a minute and a half later. He found her at the end of the hallway near the back door, and the look on his face was not the look of a man who was about to reassure her. It was the look of a man who had been caught standing somewhere. He promised himself he would never stand again. She said very quietly, "Who is he?" Jae-won pressed the back of his head against the wall, looked at the ceiling. "My cousin. Your cousin, my cousin." She stared at him. "You have a cousin who goes on blind dates in Dublin, Ohio. Trinity, you've known me 2 years and you've never mentioned a cousin. I don't talk about my family." I know that, but this is. She stopped, collected herself. What do you mean you don't talk about your family? You told me your parents are in Seoul. You told me your dad was in finance. He is in finance, it's just the kind of finance that... Jaewon stopped. He looked at her, and something in his face finally let go of the performance. What was underneath it was quieter and older, and not something she had ever seen on him before. The Kwon family doesn't just have money, Trinity. They have structure. Things that run under other things. I walked away from all of it 3 years ago. I came to Columbus and I built something small and quiet, and I stayed out of everything. The air in the hallway changed. She said, "What kind of family?" He said, "The kind where Youngchul doesn't go anywhere without a reason." She was quiet. "He didn't come here for a blind date," Jaewon said. "He came here because someone told him something, and I need to figure out what that is before the end of this dinner." They walked back to the table. Trinity smiled at her mother and sat down and picked up her fork. Youngchul watched them return. She could not read his face. She had been reading people's faces her entire life, and his was genuinely closed to her, which was the most unsettling thing about him so far. Dessert came. Leonard and Phyllis moved to the living room with their plates. Caleb disappeared in the smooth, practiced way of a younger sibling who understood that whatever was about to happen at this table was not for him. And then it was 3. Youngchul set down his spoon, looked at Jaewon, said in English, completely calm, "You look well. Grandmother will be glad to know you're alive," Jaewon said. "Don't!" Youngchul turned to Trinity. He looked at her for a moment, not sizing her up, not threatening, just looking, the way a person looks when they're deciding how honest to be. "Then how long have you known him?" 2 years, through photography." "Yes," he nodded, slow. "Then the charity gala 3 weeks ago. Kwon Holdings, you were the photographer." It was not a question. Trinity held his gaze. "I was. Our security team flagged some frames from a private corridor. A section you weren't contracted to shoot." He paused. "Do you still have those files?" The table was very quiet. Trinity did not answer immediately. She thought about that corridor, the light coming through an angled window, the way it fell across the floor in a long stripe. She had wandered in because of the light. She had taken 30 or 40 frames without thinking about anything except composition. She said, "I have everything from that shoot." Youngchul looked at her for another moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and something shifted in the room. Not the temperature, not the mood exactly, but the weight of it, like the dinner had just ended and something else had begun. "I think," he said, "that you should look at those files carefully before you do anything with them. If you're watching this story and you feel something pulling at you right now, that something bigger is coming. You're right. Drop a comment below, and if you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell. This story is just getting started." That night, after everyone left and the plates were cleared, and her mother was in the kitchen humming to herself, Trinity sat on the edge of her bed in the dark with her laptop. She opened the folder from the gala shoot. She had 412 images from that night. She went through them in order: tables, speeches, candid portraits, the formal group shots she'd been hired for. Then she got to the corridor frames, 38 images. She went through them slowly. Most of them were what she remembered: light, angles, the geometry of a hallway that nobody had decorated because nobody was supposed to be in it. But image 23 stopped her. 2 men, standing near a door at the far end of the corridor. She had caught them without meaning to. They were in the background, soft focus. She'd been shooting the light pattern on the floor, and they had simply been there. She zoomed in. The first man she didn't recognize, older, dark coat. The second man, she leaned closer to the screen. She knew his face. She had seen it on the news. She had seen it on a billboard near the highway 3 weeks ago, during a city council campaign update. City Council, Columbus. She looked at what the first man was holding. A folder, partial logo visible on the tab. She zoomed until the image started to break apart. 3 letters, a symbol, enough. She opened a browser and searched the name. The first result took her to a corporate filing, a subsidiary. She followed the subsidiary to a parent company. The parent company connected to 2 limited liability registrations. Both of those registrations listed the same registered agent. She wrote down the name, searched it. The results that came back were not about photography. They were about land. Specifically, about 40 acres on the east side of Columbus. A neighborhood that had been on the news 6 months ago because residents had been fighting a development proposal that kept moving through city permits faster than anyone could organize against it. A community that had been there for 3 generations. Churches, a rec center, a street market that ran every Saturday. All of it sitting on top of land that was now, according to a business filing dated 11 weeks ago, optioned to a development group whose capital structure, when she followed it 3 more steps, traced back to a holding company registered in Seoul. Trinity closed the laptop, sat in the dark for a while. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number," she answered. "You've been looking at the files?" Young Chul's voice even. "Not a question." She said, "How are you doing that?" "I'm not doing anything. I'm guessing based on what I know about you." A pause. "I need to meet with you, not at your family's house. Somewhere neutral. It's 11 at night. Tomorrow morning then, whenever you're ready." She looked at the closed laptop. "What exactly did I photograph?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Something that belongs to my family and something that should never have happened. And I'm not sure yet which one of those things is worse." Another pause. "I'll explain everything I can. You deserve that much." She didn't say yes right away. She sat with it. Then, "There's a coffee shop on High Street, Short North. Opens at 8. I'll be there." She hung up. She sat there another minute. Then she opened her laptop again and went back to image 23 and looked at the 2 men standing in that hallway. None of them a city official, one of them a stranger, and felt the specific feeling of a person who took a photograph of something that was supposed to stay invisible. She saved the image separately. Then she saved the full corridor sequence to an external drive. Then she went to sleep, because whatever this was, she was not going to face it tired. The coffee shop on High Street was the kind of place that had been there long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. Good coffee, wooden tables, a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in 3 years. Trinity arrived at 7:55 and took a table near the window where she could see both the door and the street. She had also texted Caleb at 7:15 and told him to be at the counter by 8 and not to look at her unless she looked at him first. Caleb had replied, "Finally, something interesting happens in this family." Young Chul arrived at 8 exactly, alone as far as she could tell. He ordered at the counter before he came to sit down, which meant he was not in a hurry and was not performing urgency. He sat across from her and looked at her in the same way he'd looked at her at the dinner table, like he'd already decided to be honest, and was just choosing the right place to start. She said, "Start with the land deal." He looked at her, a small shift in his expression. Something that might have been respect, or might have been the recalibration of someone who had expected a different opening. "You already found it." "I followed the filing trail last night. 40 acres, East Columbus, connected to a Seoul holding company. The city official in my photograph has been on the council committee that's been approving those permits." She put her hands around her coffee cup. "How long has this been in motion?" 4 years, and the community. Something moved across his face. "They were never part of the calculation." She held his gaze. "Is that your position or your family's?" He was quiet for a moment. "It was my family's. I'm trying to determine if it's still mine." That was an honest answer. She had not expected an honest answer, and the fact that it landed that way made her more careful, not less, because honest men who were connected to criminal enterprises were sometimes the most dangerous kind. She said, "Tell me what the photograph actually shows all of it." He told her. The gala 3 weeks ago had not been a fundraiser in any real sense. It was a handoff point. a place where the city official had received a document formalizing his role in a private agreement that bypassed standard public review processes for the development project. The document was not a bribe in the simple sense. It was more structural than that. An agreement that locked the official into a decision that had already been made and ensured his cooperation going forward. Trinity's photograph caught the moment the folder changed hands. That photograph, with the right context, Young Chul said, ends the development deal. It also ends his political career. And it creates a problem for my family that my father has been very carefully trying to prevent. And you? She said. He wrapped both hands around his cup. 6 months ago, I started asking questions about this project that I should have asked 4 years ago. The answers I got made it very clear that I had been kept out of certain decisions because the people making them knew I would object. Did you? Object? Yes. When I found out, yes. He looked at her. That's why I'm here, not because of a blind date. Because I needed to find the photographer and understand what she had and what she intended to do with it. Trinity nodded slowly. Then she said, Your grandmother arranged the blind date. It was not a question. He paused. Then, yes, she'd seen my work. She'd seen the photograph specifically, before I had. She has people who monitor certain things. He set down his cup. She's been building a case against my father for 3 years. She believes what he's doing is wrong, and she's been looking for something concrete enough to act on. When your gala photograph surfaced in our security review, she moved quickly. Trinity looked out the window at High Street. A woman walked past with a dog, 2 students with backpacks, to Columbus, Ohio, on an ordinary Saturday morning, containing within it a conspiracy that had been running for 4 years underneath everything. So the blind date, Trinity said. Your grandmother set both of us up. She set all 3 of us up, Young Chul said. You, me, and she made sure Jaewon would be there. Trinity looked back at him. Why Jaewon? Because Jaewon left the family 3 years ago, and my grandmother was the only one who knew exactly why. And she believed that if the 2 of us were ever in the same room again. He stopped. What? That I would finally understand what it actually costs. The coffee shop noise continued around them. Someone ordered something at the counter. Music played low from a speaker somewhere. Trinity said, She used all 3 of us. Yes, and you're telling me this because you're the one holding the photographs, he said. And because you're going to do something with them, whether I tell you any of this or not. And I would rather you do it with the full picture than without it. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. Then she said, I need to talk to Jaewon. I know, and I need time. You have it. She stood up, picked up her coffee, and looked at him one more time. One more thing. When your grandmother watched my work for 3 years, was it ever actually about the matchmaking? Young Chul considered this. Then, with what she could only describe as the quietest, almost honesty she had ever heard from a person, I think at some point it became both. Trinity looked at him, said nothing, walked to the door. Caleb fell into step beside her on the sidewalk and said absolutely nothing for half a block, which was genuinely impressive restraint for him. Then, so, how was the date? Not a date. Sure, Caleb. He watched you walk out the door for like 10 seconds straight, but okay, not a date, whatever you say. Trinity kept walking. She had an external hard drive in her bag and a subsidiary name written on a notepad in her apartment and 40 acres of East Columbus sitting underneath a decision that had been made without the people who actually lived there. She was a photographer. She had not asked for any of this, but she had the clearest eyes in any room she walked into, and she had spent 2 years building a quiet file of images that told the truth about things people tried to make invisible. She thought about those 38 corridor frames, about image 23, about the way light had come through that window and made her turn in exactly the right direction at exactly the right time. She thought, some photographs find you, and she kept walking. Jaewon opened the door of his studio apartment and looked at her and immediately opened it wider without saying a word. That was the thing about real friends. They could read the knock. She came in, sat on the stool by his work table. He made tea without asking, which she also didn't comment on. She said, "Tell me everything you know about the East Columbus land deal." He set down the kettle, turned around. He told me his version. I want yours." Jae-won sat down on the opposite stool and looked at the floor for a moment. Then he told her. 5 years ago, before Columbus, before the photography studio, before the quiet life, there had been a development project in another city, a different community, a different set of shell companies and permits and city officials. Jae-won had been 25 and still inside the family structure, and he had found out about it not through a briefing but through a photograph. Someone else's photograph. A community newspaper, a street full of people standing in front of a building that no longer exists. He had gone to his father. His father had explained in very patient terms that this was how capital worked, that communities moved, that progress required decisions that were uncomfortable for some. Jae-won had left within 2 months. He had not looked back. "The Columbus project is the same pattern," he said. "Different city. Bigger scale, more sophisticated legal structure." He looked at her. "How deep did you go last night?" 3 layers of filings. Subsidiary to parent to registered agent. She pulled out her notepad. "I found the name." He looked at the name. His face did something complicated. "That's my uncle's company, Youngchul's father." "I know. Trinity," he looked at her. "These people are not reckless. The way this is structured, the way the permits moved through. There are real lawyers and real political connections, and a family that has been doing this for a long time. You understanding the whole picture and actually being able to do anything about it are 2 very different things." "I know that too." "So what are you going to do?" She drank her tea, thought about Youngchul saying, "You're going to do something with them, whether I tell you any of this or not." Thought about his grandmother, a woman she had never met, who had watched her work for 3 years and moved chess pieces across 3 time zones to put 3 specific people in a room in suburban Dublin, Ohio. She thought about 40 acres, about a rec center, about a Saturday market that ran every week because somebody decided a long time ago that their community deserved a place to gather. She said, "You still have contacts inside the family structure?" Jae-won looked at her carefully. "Some, and you know how the filing trail connects to the permits. I helped build that structure, Trinity. I know every layer." She set down the cup. "Then I need you to write it down, all of it. Not for a lawyer, not for Youngchul, for me, so I understand the full picture before I decide what to do next." He held her gaze. "And if what you decide puts you in a difficult position, I'm already in a difficult position." She picked up her bag. "I was in a difficult position the moment I walked down that hallway and took a photograph because the light was nice." He almost smiled. "Almost. You and your light, write it down, Jae-won," he nodded. She left, and she was already thinking about the next step before she hit the sidewalk, because Trinity Douglas did not wait for the room to tell her what to do. She read the room first. Then she decided. She found Pastor Webb on a Thursday. She had not been looking for him specifically. She had been looking for anyone connected to the East Columbus Community Resistance, the group that had been fighting the ad development proposal for 18 months through public comment periods and city meetings, and a petition that kept getting acknowledged and then quietly set aside. Pastor Webb ran a church on Livingston Avenue that had been on the east side for 31 years. He was 63, wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and had a filing cabinet in his office that contained every document related to the development proposal that had ever been made public. He had been waiting, he told Trinity, for someone to come with something that connected what he had to something that actually mattered. Trinity opened her laptop and showed him image 23. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's Councilman Harris, I know, and that folder connects to the registered agent on the development filings." He took off his reading glasses, put them back on. looked at the image again. Young lady, where did you take this photograph? At a private event 3 weeks ago. I was the contracted photographer. I wandered somewhere I wasn't supposed to be because the light was good. He looked at her over the glasses. The light, I know. He stood up and went to the filing cabinet. He came back with 3 folders, and inside them were signed statements from 6 community residents documenting conversations they had been asked to have by city officials. Conversations in which they were offered relocation assistance in exchange for withdrawing from the public comment process. 2 of the statements included dates and specific language that matched, word for word, language. In the permit approval documents Yo Won had helped Trinity map out the night before. Trinity looked at the documents for a long time. Then she looked up at Pastor Webb and said, "Can I photograph these?" He said, "You can take them." She took them. She did not call a reporter. She did not go to Youngshul. She did not call a lawyer yet. She went home. She sat at her kitchen table, the same table where prints still hung on the wire above, the same bowl from the same cereal from weeks ago, the same apartment where she had answered a FaceTime call while tired and set all of this in motion. And she built a file. Image 23. The subsidiary Trail J1 had written out by hand the permit approval documents, the 6 signed community statements, a timeline that she built herself, date by date, from public records and private documents, and 1 photograph taken because the light in a hallway was beautiful. It took her 4 hours. When she was done, she looked at it the same way she looked at a finished photograph. Standing back, checking the frame, making sure every element was where it needed to be. It was complete. She called Caleb. He arrived in 20 minutes. She walked him through everything without rushing. He listened without interrupting, which was not something he did often, which told her he understood the weight. When she finished, he sat back and said, "What do you need?" she said. "I need a lawyer who knows how to walk something into a closed session board meeting without it being traced back till it's already inside." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Then I know someone from school. She does ethics compliance work. How good is she?" She got a manufacturing company's entire board removed in 6 weeks. Trinity nodded. "Call her tonight." She picked up her phone and made 1 more call. Youngshul answered on the 2nd ring. She said, "Your grandmother is in Seoul?" "Yes. Can you get her to Columbus in 3 days?" A long pause. "What are you planning?" "Something she started 3 years ago." Trinity looked at the file on her table. "I'm just finishing it." Another pause. "Longer then, I'll call her." "Good." She started to hang up. "Trinity." She stopped. "Whatever happens after this," he paused. "I want you to know that I didn't come to that dinner just because of the photographs." She looked at the wall. Outside, Columbus kept going the way cities do. Indifferent, enormous, full of 40-acre parcels and Saturday markets, and people who had built something somewhere and were trying to hold on to it. She said, "I know." Then she hung up, looked at the file, looked at her camera sitting on the table beside it. She picked up the camera, because whatever was about to happen, she was going to document it. The Kwan Holdings Emergency Board meeting was called on a Wednesday. Trinity had arranged the flag that triggered it, an anonymous tip to a financial ethics body, routed through Caleb's lawyer contact, citing irregularities in subsidiary reporting structures. Standard enough to require a response, unusual enough to require it quickly. Youngshul's father walked into that boardroom expecting a financial review. What he found was different. His mother was seated at the far end of the table. She had flown in from Seoul the night before. She did not look at her son when he walked in. She looked at the independent ethics board members seated along the left side of the room. People who had received, 30 minutes before the meeting, a sealed packet of documentation that took them exactly 22 minutes to read. Trinity was not in the boardroom. She was in the hallway outside with her camera and her hard drive and her file waiting. She heard the moment it shifted. Not through the door. She couldn't hear the words. But she heard the quality of the silence change. The kind of silence that falls when something that has been standing for a long time finally accepts the weight of what it has been carrying. 40 minutes later, the door opened. Youngchul came out first. He stood in the hallway and looked at her. He looked like a person who had just watched something he'd known was coming and still wasn't fully ready for. She looked back at him and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say yet. Behind him, at the far end of the hallway, his father walked past without looking at either of them. Youngchul's grandmother came out last. She was smaller than Trinity expected, sharp eyes behind simple frames. She looked at Trinity for a long moment with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular thing and has finally seen it arrive. She said in English, "You have your mother's stubbornness." Trinity blinked. "You know my mother. I knew of her, the same way I knew of you." The old woman adjusted her glasses. "Your mother raised someone who looks at the world and sees what it actually is, not what it wants to appear to be." She held Trinity's gaze. "That is not common." Trinity said, "You used all three of us." "Yes, you could have sent a lawyer. A lawyer would have been blocked within a week." She tilted her head slightly. "You were not blockable, because you didn't know you were doing it until you were already done." Trinity thought about image 23, about the light in a hallway, about a photograph that had been, and at the moment she took it, nothing more than a composition problem she was trying to solve. She said, "It worked." "It worked," the old woman agreed. Then she walked past, down the hallway, and was gone. Outside the building, on the steps, Trinity sat with her laptop and opened it. She went to the gala folder, found image 23, looked at it. The two men in the background, the folder, the light falling across the floor between them. She had taken better photographs, more intentional ones, more technically correct ones, but she had never taken one that mattered more. Youngchul sat down beside her on the steps, not close, not far. The distance of two people who haven't decided yet. She said, "Councilman Harris resigned an hour ago." He looked at the street. "The development deal is suspended pending investigation. It'll collapse by the end of the month." "The community." She nodded. He said, "You didn't have to do it the way you did. I know. You could have sold the photographs, or given them to a reporter and walked away. I could have." She looked at him, but the photographs alone weren't the story. The story was everything underneath them, and I wanted the whole story told. He was quiet for a moment. "Then you're a very unusual person." "My mother says that too. She means it differently." He almost smiled. Fully this time. Not contained, not performed. Just a person smiling because something was actually worth smiling at. It changed his face completely, and she noticed that and filed it away in the same place she'd been filing things about him since a dinner table 3 weeks ago. He said, "My grandmother is going to want to meet you properly, without the agenda. Does she know how to do that? Honestly, no." A pause. "But she's trying." Trinity closed the laptop, looked at the street. A woman with a stroller, 2 kids on bikes. Columbus, Ohio, ordinary as ever. "Your mother has already called mine," Youngchul said. "I know. Caleb texted me." "What did he say?" She stood up and looked at him. "He said, and I, quote, told you." Youngchul looked up at her from the steps with the specific expression of a man who was trying not to find that funny and was losing. She said, "Coffee, real coffee, not a meeting. You explain to me why your grandmother has been watching my work for 3 years, and I decide if I find it flattering or alarming." He stood up. "It becomes less alarming once you understand her." "Does it?" Slightly. They walked. Columbus moved around them. Somewhere on the east side, 40 acres stayed exactly where they had always been, under houses and churches and a Saturday market, and the specific stubborn weight of people who had decided that what they had built was worth keeping. Caleb was parked across the street. He watched them turn the corner together and immediately called Jaewon. Jaewon, in his studio in the short north, answered on the 3rd ring. Caleb said, "They're getting coffee." A long pause. Then Jaewon laughed, not a polite laugh or a performance. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere real. The place that opens up in a person when they realize that something they quietly hoped for has quietly arrived. Yeah, Caleb said, grinning. Told you.